Hi there, this is the HR Hub and I'm Andrea Adams. So today we're going to talk about HR audits. How do you do one? Why would you do one? What do you do with the results? That's coming up shortly. Keep listening to learn about this topic or any other related to HR. You can also find me on YouTube. Today my guest is again Elissa Lok. Elissa is an HR consultant and trainer with HR West, and full disclosure, she's a coworker and a friend. She is also the head of Spacemaker Canada, which specializes in productivity and digital wellness. The link between productivity and digital wellness might seem like a stretch, but it's not. You should check out the video we did on that. Hi, Elissa. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. Looking forward to this. So, HR audit. What is it and why would we do one?
Thanks. Yeah. So an HR audit, they go by different names. So it can also be called a health check. It can be called HR discovery. So it's an overview of how healthy your HR function is. So broadly, we look at policies, procedures, documentation, systems, and practices to reveal strengths, opportunities, and risks. So organizations would typically engage in an audit when they're aware there's a need to improve. They're not sure where to start. They'd like to take action, but really aren't sure what the focus should be on that. So an audit is diagnostic and it tells you what's missing and what needs to improve, but it doesn't specifically tell an organization what it needs to do about it.
It doesn't tell organizations what it needs to do about it.
No, so it would tell you, where the strengths are, where the risks are, where the opportunities to improve are, but it's not strategic plan, as in it doesn't go into, okay, and now this is what you need to do to fix it. That would be typically what would follow an audit. So an audit, it's diagnostic, it's a overview of your current HR function, policies, practices, systems, documentation, and provides a summary of areas that are going well, areas that there's opportunity to improve, and risk areas that should be addressed a little bit more urgently or non-compliant.
I think this is probably the key question here. How do you structure an HR audit? How do you go about gathering all that information?
Right. Yeah. Well, what's that in HR? So first, of course, we meet with the client, the HR leaders, to find out what are their goals, make sure that an audit is the right tool for them. They have an understanding of what will be involved. For an audit to be successful, the organization does need to be engaged, obviously, in the process for us to gather that information. So once we agree to the process, we would send out like a form and a checklist that goes through the steps and that has an outline of the things that they would need to send us. So we'd set up secure file sharing if it's remote, which everything is these days, even if we're meeting in person, the information shared remotely. So they complete the checklist. They send us a number of documents, so basically anything that they would have related to their HR function based on the information we need. So then myself as the consultant performing the audit, I would review the documents, go through the checklist, and then schedule an interview with the HR contact at the organization. So whoever gave me the information, whoever my main contact is, and there I would discuss any further questions I had, any clarifications I need. Based on that interview, I would put together a report. So the report will cover compliance issues like related to WorkSafe, WorkSafe BC, employee file storage, those things, and then a number of competency areas of their HR function. So I put together a report, send that to the HR contact at the organization as a draft, make sure that there's accurate understanding, nothing else that I'm missing. Once the report's finalized, it would be presented to the organization so they can understand the overview and areas that are strong, areas that need development, and areas that are risk.
I think a lot of people are going to be wondering about the details, like what policies, what process, what systems, like what are the details? Because I guess an audit kind of lives in the details, right?
And I think it's important to understand that, an audit isn't the deep dive into the nitty gritty of every area of your HR function. That would be something they would do further, if there's an issue identified. So broadly, we'd be looking at what policies do you have? Who were the policies, developed in a way that they should be sufficient. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but, if the business doesn't have any policies, what policies do they have? Are the policies up to date? Do they have key policies? For example, WorkSafe BC requires policies around bullying and harassment. So we look at what are the policies that they have. So they send us either the policies they have, their handbook, whatever it is that they're using. We'd look at how they store employee information. And then we look at things related to the employee lifecycle. How do they recruit? How do they manage performance? How do they ensure, how do they train their staff? Is there any focus on that? What's their health and safety program like? Do they have one? So we look at, compliance pieces to the extent that, as a consultant, looking at what a business, should have. We look at their offer letter. Does their offer letter, is it a, one-liner that says you're hired, or do they have an offer letter that was put together by a knowledgeable person? So they would send us any information related to that, and we go through a number of different categories and fields, and put together a report based on that information. Depending on the size of the organization, the amount of information we'd be reviewing could vary significantly. Right? If it's a large organization, or they've been through a merger or an acquisition, that's going to be a different type of audit than a business of 20 people, and they want us to understand where they're making the same on any compliance pieces. So,
does this take a long time, and what kind of preparation is required before you ever actually start reviewing documentation?
Yeah, I mean, in the checklist we provide to the employer, it's an overview of what documents we need. So, it really starts in earnest when that's been sent to the HR consultant, so we can start our review. It can take anywhere from 4 weeks to 8 weeks or longer, depending, again, on the size of the organization. Typically, I'd say more between 4 to 6 weeks. But it depends on the size of the organization. It depends also on the availability of the employer and their engagement in moving the process forward. You can gather a certain amount of information from documents, but that will still leave questions that need to be discussed in an interview. Mm-hmm. And a two-way relationship.
Mm-hmm. Just refresh my memory. Did you say you gather the documents, then you interview, or do you interview and gather documents?
And so typically we would gather the documents, review what's documented, and then based on any questions that we still had or missing pieces, then we would have an interview with the HR contact at the organization just to clarify, understand any pieces that we might be missing, or if there's anything that is inconsistent or we're unsure about.
What is critical to ensure success of an audit?
The success of the audit is really dependent on the accuracy and thoroughness of the information that's provided. For example, if an organization doesn't provide complete information, or maybe they have some areas they're not very proud of and they're reluctant to share, then the audit is not going to be as accurate and effective. So we really encourage organizations that, nobody has an HR function that is performing well in every single area. Most businesses do have areas that need improvement, need development, and it's really important to understand what those are. Doesn't mean that we can fix them all overnight or get everything up to 100%, but, we need to have a realistic picture of what's going on so that following the audit, they can understand how to prioritize their HR efforts. And that's where an audit typically is followed by strategic planning. So, as I said, no organization is perfect in every HR area. That's not realistic or an expectation, but where does the focus need to be to have the biggest impact, or are there any higher risk areas where there's a lack of compliance? So we really encourage our clients to, be really honest, really forthcoming with the information. Not ashamed if there's areas that either they don't have any development on, or that are really out of date, so that we can see the full picture and together a plan that's going to work for them. It's very common that businesses either have really out of date policies, or maybe they don't do any performance management. These are all things that happen in the busyness of work. So it's important to understand, okay, if you don't have a accurate or a, compliant offer letter, all right, now we know that we can work on that. So it's important that they're engaged. It's important that they provide us with the full information. And I'd say most importantly, that they are eager to discover, right? Want to discover what areas need improvement, so that following the audit, there can be effective changes made to their HR function if needed.
So some organizations, though, are really sophisticated, and some, as you said, are, they've got 20 employees. They don't even have an HR employee, and so they're not sophisticated. How do you audit the sophisticated versus the not sophisticated?
No, well, that's it. The expectations aren't going to be the same for an organization of, 1,000 people versus 20 people, or, different types of organizations. So we use, so Josh Burson has a functional maturity model for HR surveys that we use. It's really helpful, and it breaks organizations into 4 levels. So the first level would be compliance-driven HR services. So that's where they're really just looking at being compliant and, doing the things that they need to do, to be ticking those boxes. The next level would be fundamental HR services. So there's sort of a partial strategy defined. There's some HR structures and functions, but it's really just based on what's fundamental. There's some core policies, some core services. The next level would be a strategic HR department. So that's where the department already has strategy aligned with the business strategy. HR is already kind of at the table when it comes to leadership and decisions, and they're just wondering how they can improve that. And then a business integrated HR would be the 4th level, where HR is fully integrated into the business, and obviously the way that we would be auditing organizations based on where they fall in the HR functional maturity level is going to differ in terms of what they're looking for, right? You're not going to let it say a very small organization or a very young organization that's want the compliance-driven HR service. You're not assessing them to get to 100% where everything's integrated. You're working with them where they are and assessing them based on what's reasonable for their size and where they're at that time.
It sometimes seems like, and I'm mindful of this as a consultant, that you can give them a laundry list of things to do and it can overwhelm them. How do you manage, that just creating this task list of a million things to do?
Yeah. So when we complete the report, the way that I structure it is, it starts off with an executive summary of what the findings were, and that's broken into 3 categories: risks, opportunities, and strengths. So ensuring we are communicating it in a way that is easy to understand, easy to digest. It also focuses on areas that are strong. We also provide an overview of the CPHR competencies and clarification that, no business really is expected to be at 10 out of 10 on all of these areas. So then we go through and explain in more detail under each category where they're strong, where there's risk, where there's opportunity. And then at the conclusion of the report, we outline what are the next steps following the audit and sort of break it down for them. Again, not with the detail of what specifically areas they're going to focus on, to say, okay, so typically following an audit, first thing a business would do is look at compliance and deal with any compliance issues or higher risk issues that need to be addressed right away. Following that, typically there'd be strategic planning to prioritize that laundry list. So
Okay.
Most organizations are used to their, there's always far more projects to do than there is time. So having a way to prioritize that, and that typically would be when an organization following the audit would engage with strategic planning with either myself as a consultant or, another firm, or internally engage in strategic planning to prioritize, say that there were 8 key areas that were identified as an opportunity to improve, over a 3-year plan, which are the most important are going to have the most impact. So that would typically be following. But, we do try to make it not overwhelming to receive the information. So got an executive summary at the beginning. We've got, next steps on the last page, as well as an understanding of how are we assessing you and, what level of HR functional maturity is your organization.
Okay. You were just talking about this. It's not, this isn't strategic planning. This feeds into strategic planning. Is that how they connect? It's just insight.
Exactly. So as I said, it's diagnostic. It's to understand what's going on, where are we at right now. One of the names I really like for this process, audit sounds very, technical, reminds me of the CRA, but, a health check. What is the health of the various functional areas in HR? And then from that, when you do get your list, you get your summary, that makes it much easier to then move into strategic planning. So as I said, we like to be very clear up front. This is not a strategic planning document. We're looking at the health of your HR function. And then following that, if they do engage in strategic planning, they have already an idea of what are the key areas they're going to be discussing in that strategic planning and making decisions about.
Thanks, Elissa. I appreciate that this is diagnostic. You started and ended with that, and that it's going to give us some insights into some things we could do, but we don't necessarily have to do them all. It's just like our personal lives where there's a million things we could do to improve our lives, but you can't do everything. But anyway, we have reached the end of this episode. Thanks for listening out there. We'll catch you next time when I talk with another insightful guest.